Hi everyone, my name is Matthew Mims. I'm a co-founder and CEO at hiveonline. We're an impact fintech startup based out of Copenhagen and Stockholm. We have teams in Rwanda and working on projects throughout Sub-Saharan Africa. The talk for today is around digital finance for the next billion. What is the next billion? How big is it? And what are the needs from a digital finance perspective? I'll talk through the challenges, some of the potential solutions, and give some insights on what we're working on, as well as some case studies from what we're doing in projects in Sub-Saharan Africa. But the first real piece to sort of work out is what, you know, a billion people is a huge number, but it's a bit difficult to get your head around how big that is. Google have got something like Facebook have got about 2.5 billion people on their platform, but it's very difficult to size that. But if we think that right now the global population is 7.8 billion people on the globe, and I've plotted here from 2000 up to 2050, you can see that in the past 12 years, we've increased the global population by 1 billion globally, and there'll be another 1 billion added in the next 13 years. So the rate is slowing slightly, but it's a huge number of people adding to the population. And interestingly, where are those people coming from, and sort of how is this growth happening? If you look at the sort of the Western developed world, most of that is static or single-digit growth over these periods, compared to growth being driven out of South Asia, Middle East, and North Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa, which are still growing at a huge rate. And I think when we think about sort of the next billion people on this planet, we then need to think about sort of what will those challenges be, and fundamentally, you know, with our growing acknowledgement about about climate change and the finite resources that we have and the need for us all to live on the planet together, but also the elements of being able to support you know, fundamental human rights and standard of living, and you know, there's still a huge proportion of the world who are living in poverty. How do we support that growth for those organizations, but also people right at the bottom of the pyramid, as well as looking after the planet and making sure that this is, you know, something sustainable for the long term? Something that we've looked at and at hiveonline on how to think about this in a more sustainable way going forward, is to sort of put aside the world of exponential growth forever, so that, you know, when you consider that there's you know, 7 billion people in this world today, and then you look at Elon Musk, who's, you know, got a wealth of $200 billion, and yet there are still people struggling to eat and survive in harsh environments. There needs to be a different way of looking at things, and I don't know however many of you have heard about the Donorski Economics, but it was created by someone called Kate Raworth, and it really looks at how can we shift that perspective of looking at the economy and global economy from sort of two perspectives. How can we support a core level of the social foundation of the fundamentals that we need for the, you know, humanity to be somewhat comfortable, but also acknowledge that there is a ecological ceiling, where if we exceed that, we start to affect our you know, planetary boundaries around climate change and plenty of other aspects of depleting the world's resources. Lots of research has been done based on these measures and looking across, I've plotted here Sweden, Mozambique, United Kingdom, Zambia, and whilst Sweden and United Kingdom are massively exceeding the ecological aspect, you can also see there's some aspects where there's still work to be done from some supporting social foundations, specifically in things around employment and other things like that. But obviously, when we look at places in sub-Saharan Africa, where this is growing more and more, and this next billion is going to come from, there's a lot more work needs to be done around supporting the social foundation and supporting the growth out of poverty. But also, you can start to see that it still needs to be considered within the sort of the planetary boundaries, so that these communities aren't damaging the planet and creating more climate change as well. So that's sort of for us, one of the big macro pictures of where we're doing that. Now, when we talk about next billion, a lot of times, especially in the sort of the more tech world, everyone's really focusing about the next billion smartphone users. And it's interesting to contrast those two, really. So global users from a mobile internet perspective, between 2020 and 2025, there will be 1 billion more users of smart devices, smartphones, or internet-connected mobile devices globally. That's a massive opportunity, and I think what we're trying to see is how can we join these two challenges of growth together to create a win-win scenario. One of the challenges is, though, that there is a digital divide where there are many billions of iPhone users today, and yet sub-Saharan Africa is still struggling with infrastructure to be able to access the wealth of available resources from that the internet can provide. But there is hope. This chart from the World Bank starts to show that over the past 10 years or so, mobile subscriptions, so feature phones, have increased over time, which is obviously one step along the way, but quickly catching up is also internet users. So there is a large proportion of these extra billion who are going to be added in the smartphone world will be in sub-Saharan Africa and more developing countries, which gives us a massive opportunity to help them access the opportunities that we have in the Western world and take for granted. So what role does digital finance have to play? Well, we see, obviously, from our background, that there's a lot of aspects that we feel we can support in. Part of our background, myself and Sophie's background, is working in global banking for sort of globally significant banks. And there were two pieces that really frustrated us about where that industry was moving. One was the perspective that a lot of the world was blind to some of those challenges around really the needs for the future and the needs for small businesses, etc. But also the perspective that there is a lot of opportunity, especially through adopting new technology, which a lot of the traditional financial players are struggling to adopt. And we've been in those organizations and tried to make those changes, but we felt that it was time for us to push ahead and try and do that ourselves, because working in big organizations is slow, and we felt that this needed to go faster. Obviously, finance has a lot of different perspectives, and there's probably plenty more than the pieces that we focus on here. But I think one of the things that we've tried to look at is how can we break this out wider than just purely the traditional world of money being so related to finance. There's so much more around reputation and trust, as well as non-tangible assets, and also assets that aren't necessarily things that we can count as easily, But if we tried, maybe we could do that a bit easier. One of the pieces of technology that we've really felt was valuable and could really help this was blockchain. And no, it's not just crypto, it's not just Bitcoin, etc. But this does really give a new perspective to be able to support a digital distributed economy. Assets, and they don't have to be money or cash in a sense, can be held in a wallet, and they don't have to be connected to the formal banking system. Also, we can create stable coins and things like that that we do peg to national currencies, but digitize them and make them easier and more accessible for people who need it. But also one thing that we're looking at quite a lot is also how we can look at things like other tokens, potentially in the NFT world as well, to represent different assets, and how can we value those assets, such as some more environmental assets like carbon, but also trees as well, and put those into the economic questions and the economic balance that we're trying to work with. And one other aspect that we need to put into that mix when we're working with technology is obviously it's very powerful, but it's also something we need to be very careful about in how we apply it. And especially when we're looking at these groups that won't have used smartphones before, there's a lot that we need to build into our systems in order to support that, both security and responsibility about data, but also just making it easy to access, both on not tying it to specific devices, but also making it accessible and simple to use. And that's why we try to use a lot of web technologies rather than installed apps, etc., because they're far more flexible there. Obviously, we're still going to need to integrate with the banking systems in how we do things and do integrations with those, but also try and make it as easy for value to flow around the system as possible. Obviously, data. And obviously, one of the other questions that we get a lot, especially when mentioning blockchain and climate in the same perspective, is, hang on a second, isn't Bitcoin burning the planet, etc.? Well, no, there are other ways that blockchain can work that aren't based on proof of work like Bitcoin, that can provide low energy blockchain that we can use for some of these solutions. I'm happy to answer questions on that later. But in the last few minutes, I just wanted to talk through a couple of sort of tangible situations where some of what we're doing based on these the technology and the biggest challenges are really deriving value right now. So we work in Zambia with savings groups. These are communities who save money together. Typically on a weekly basis, they come together because they don't have access to a bank account in order to do those savings. So they use the community to do that. And historically, over the past 30 years or so, a system has originated where they put the money in a metal box with several padlocks owned by different people, and they write all their records in a paper exercise book as their ledger. But obviously, these communities are low literacy, haven't had the advantage of lots of schooling like we have, and so for them, some of the calculations about interest payments or dividing the money up amongst the group can become very complicated. Also, it's because paper records can't be duplicated very easily. It's very easy for conflicts to appear within communities, etc. And also, there are NGOs who we're working with, like South Africa, who want to be able to monitor these groups, and especially during COVID times, the only way they can monitor the physical groups is to visit them in person. And so these are some of the challenges that we took into how we support those savings groups. And what we came up with was an app backed by the hiveonline platform. We call that VSLA Online, which is Village Savings and Loans Association online. And essentially what we've done with that as a first step is to help them digitize those records. We build in the calculations in order for them to be able to do a lot of those actions very simply. We send any user that doesn't have a device, doesn't have a smartphone, an SMS as a receipt of the meeting, so they know what's taken place. But we've really tried to focus on making it simple, and that only one person within the group, typically the secretary, needs to be able to use that device. Behind the scenes, we record all of those transactions onto the blockchain so that we get a lot of the value of indelible records that don't need to be trusted by us, or we don't need to be trusted because we can't edit those, but also moving towards and building that foundation to move towards a far more decentralized model about how these groups can manage their value. But also, because this is digitized, the NGOs that we work with can also get simple dashboards which allow them to view this online without having to send someone in a Jeep for 2 hours to go and find out how much money they've got and how many loans they've given that month, and can provide easier support remotely through that. Where we intend to go with this is actually to be able to, instead of just purely managing the cash and the record keeping, is actually to transition to a stable coin over the blockchain to support exchange of value and money between groups, and actually linking into lenders and microfinance institutions as well, so that these groups can grow and get access to a lot of the wider benefits of finance for their ecosystem. Another use case we're working a lot with right now is a program in Mozambique. And I didn't mention how many weeks, so we've got nearly 2,000 people in Zambia using our VSLA solution. And in Mozambique, we've got 3,000 farmers, predominantly cashew farmers, who are organized in cooperatives in a similar model, in the sense that they're a community that are coming together to do unified things. And again, a lot of their records are paper-based right now, which means that firstly, they don't get the analysis to do that feedback loop, but also that they are unable to demonstrate assets like the number of trees they have, the amount of cashew that they produced last harvest, in order to get access to credit, to buy machinery, to grow their business, etc. So this is another area where we're very much digitizing, helping to capture value both at the money and accounting perspective, but also looking at, measuring cashew crops as assets, measuring trees as assets, etc. And that's where we've really then transitioned this to be able to track those agricultural assets, provide data analysis and feedback, even for field agents and for the NGOs we work with, be able to see across the region where these cooperatives are where they're based, but also then enabling that to be shared with other forms of support like microfinance, etc., as well as market prices, and linking them up with the revenue generation services like buyers of their cashew, etc., which typically otherwise they would only be able to sell to local markets. I won't go into the third use case. It's a bit of a futuristic use case, but what we also start to see is that some of these solutions, we can look at even putting things like carbon credits onto the blockchain and using the benefits of clean cooking stoves connected with digital and smartphones to be able to generate carbon credits for users of these technologies in rural areas, and to make a profit out of that by selling their carbon credit. But anyway, that was a sort of whistle-stop tour through the world of digital finance for the next billion, where we're trying to balance both the sustainable aspect of making this a fair and equitable but climate healthy world, but leveraging the best of technology that we can do. So we're doing a lot more at Hive Online. Please look us up on the internet, www.hivenetwork.online. But obviously free to open out into questions or any other specific things that people want to ask. And I need to make sure that I'm not missing any questions here. Sofie, have I missed any questions on the?
No, there's no questions in the chat that I can see. Come on, someone ask a question. Any questions about blockchain or?
I can see somebody in the audience called Oscar substituting money with barter, which is one of the areas that we're quite interested in around where we where once you start to record other types of assets and don't need cash or money as the interface between those, how does that really work in a futuristic Web3 type world? And where does taxation or something like that fit in? An interesting area.
Yes, digitizing the barter economy. It's and I think one of the interesting things that you can do with blockchain is to remove the need to use money as a unit of account. And when you're talking about barter over blockchain, obviously you've got huge efficiencies and opportunities for lots of different types of assets. Which something, yeah, as Matt says, we're moving into. So.
Cool.
So everyone's going to the Upstart World Q&A area. The link is in the chat if anyone wants to go there to ask questions. We'll be there.
Cool. We'll do that now.
So thanks everyone for your attention.
Yeah, thanks for your time.